All right, I'm gonna kick it off. Want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. We're here to mark the release of Marijuana Policy's report. It's called Behind the Times, the 19 States Where a Joint Can Land You in Jail. And I'll just give a little background. According to Gallup polling, 68% of Americans agree cannabis use should be legal. Meanwhile, Civic's polling reports majority support for legalization in every single state, and yet dozens of states continue to prohibit cannabis in 19 states, and the federal government still penalize even simple possession with possible jail time and a criminal record. The report that I just mentioned that the Marijuana Policy Project is releasing today examines the laws that lag the furthest behind the public opinion that I just expressed in Gallup and Civics, the 19 states and federal government, which have not even decriminalized simple possession of cannabis. In those states, it examines penalties of simple possession, arrest rates, and racial disparities in arrest, and provides a glimpse at some of the damages inflicted by the draconian laws. It also reviews unsolved crime rates in the states that continue to use limited law enforcement resources to arrest and jail adults for possessing a substance that is safer than alcohol. Specifically, with respect to Pennsylvania, that is a state where Blacks are more than 3 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession. And a 2020 poll conducted by Harper Polling found that 62% of likely voters in Pennsylvania favor legal regulated sales of cannabis for adults 21 and over. But despite that popular support, the current law in Pennsylvania continues to impose up to a 30-day imprisonment or a fine of $500 for possession of up to 30 grams of cannabis, just over an ounce. And there's been some local progress with respect to decriminalization at the local level in cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, towns like Harrisburg, York State College. But there's still a ton of arrests being made for cannabis possession. In 2019, 34% of the law enforcement agencies in the state made 11,239 arrests for cannabis possession. All in that same period, the clearance rates for violent crimes and property crimes remain fairly low. And so we've brought together a group of lawmakers who have been advocates on this issue of decriminalization for quite some time. And we're going to kick it off with Representative Jordan Harris to just speak a little bit about decriminalization and his efforts in Pennsylvania.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me into the Marijuana Policy Project for putting this on. The statistics are clear, and I don't have to repeat the statistics that you shared. What we know is that across the Commonwealth of PA, there are still people who are being arrested for small amounts of marijuana. While many of our bigger cities have passed local ordinances at the state level, we have not fully dealt with that, and the federal government has not fully dealt with that. And what we're doing is we're criminalizing people. We're wasting taxpayer dollars by incarcerating people for something that is less harmful than alcohol. And I bring up alcohol because in Pennsylvania, let's be clear, in Pennsylvania, it is the government that sells alcohol. We control the liquor stores in Pennsylvania. So we are selling this product. We are selling this substance that we know is more harmful than marijuana. I tell people all the time, I've seen people go to the hospital with an alcohol overdose. I ain't never heard of nobody going to the hospital with a marijuana overdose. The only thing that is in danger when a person is overdosed on marijuana may be a bag of chips. So, what we have to do is we have to move forward with legislation to seriously statewide decriminalize marijuana. We're wasting taxpayer dollars. We're sending people to prison. We're breaking up families. And we're doing all of this for a substance that we know is less harmful than the substance that we actually sell with a state seal on it, and that's alcohol. So I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you continuing to be steadfast and raising the alarm on this, and hopefully in the near future, we can decriminalize marijuana in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for adult use. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Representative Harris. Really appreciate your time and you sharing your perspective. I do want to remind any press that's present, if you could put your questions in the chat and Q&A, and we do ask that you identify your outlet so we can get to your question after the next round of speakers. Do want to toss it off to Representative McClinton. And Representative, I do know you have a very unique perspective as a former public defender and attorney in Pennsylvania, dealing with this issue, particularly decriminalization and across the state, and have seen, how that policy has ravaged our community. And so would really appreciate your perspective, not only as a lawmaker, but also as a practicing attorney in the Commonwealth. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Devon. It's great to be here this morning, and thanks to my colleague, the whip of the Pennsylvania House Democratic Caucus, Representative Jordan Harris, for being steadfast in his support of decriminalization and being here this morning with us. What I saw, to get to your question about my practice of law in the city of Philadelphia as a public defender, was that so many of my clients were entangled in a system that is not fair and that is not equitable. I saw that in communities like the one I live in, that I've lived in my whole life, where we have fewer opportunities. Sometimes there are choices made that leave long-lasting, unnecessary, harsh consequences. And I'm talking about choices made regarding, as my colleague just shared, about something that is less physical consequences than alcohol as it relates to intoxication. And when we think about mass incarceration, Pennsylvania is one of the most incarcerated states in the United States. And African Americans, we're only 12% of the population of the state. But of course, unfortunately, in the high 40% of people who are incarcerated in the state Department of Corrections. Now, while all of those instances are not related to marijuana, there are far too many. There are too many that are related to marijuana. And so since we've been seeing decriminalization happen in different states, we see that Pennsylvania is now behind, and that as a member and as the leader of our caucus in the General Assembly, we have to realize that our laws do not always keep up with science, with public opinion, with modern times, with changes in opinions and outlooks and even understanding. I was working as staff in the Senate when we adopted our medicinal marijuana law and saw how difficult of a process that was, and realized that we now need to do the same thing. We need to look at the penalties. We need to see what the repercussions are. We need to see how people are arrested at high rates for small amounts of marijuana, and how that in fact causes so many other problems. When we think about 50 years, the last 50 years, so much has changed, including now 31 states and the District of Columbia. They have all enacted laws to keep people out of jail for possessing small amounts of marijuana. And so many in Pennsylvania have been making similar efforts right here in Philadelphia, across the Turnpike in the Southwestern PA, in Pittsburgh, at the center of the state in Harrisburg, Stilton, York, State College, at the far Northwest in Erie, in Lancaster, in the Northeast in Bethlehem, and right outside of Philly in Upper Darby. These municipalities should not be making these decisions on their own. At the state level, we need to step up and do the same. 50 years later, since there was the Shafer report delivered, we need to make sure that we make the decisions in Harrisburg that protect everyone's health, but also prevent unnecessary consequences in the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative McClinton. You could not have said it better. Or articulated that more strongly, the need for reform on the statewide level. And I do know there are several legalization proposals pending in Pennsylvania. There are a couple decriminalization bills as well, and do hope that they do all receive some type of hearing and some type of action in this long session that Pennsylvania has, this year-long session. Hopefully we can bring some much needed relief to the Commonwealth. Do want to open it up for questions. If anyone from the press does have any questions for myself or either Representative Harris or Representative McClinton. All right. I don't see anyone. But I do want to, before we wrap up, I do want to give everybody or remind everybody that the report is available at mpp.org. It is a report that covers the 50 years since the Shafer report. This report does have a special connection to the state of Pennsylvania, in that Governor Shafer is a former governor of Pennsylvania, Republican governor of Pennsylvania, who is the chair of the Shafer Commission, which came out with the findings 50 years ago that cannabis should be decriminalized on the state and federal level. I do see our law enforcement person has just joined us, and I do want to give Christy Smith an opportunity to speak a little bit about decriminalization and the viewpoint from law enforcement in the Commonwealth. And Christy, thanks for joining us. Feel free to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Christy, I am speaking on behalf of the Law Enforcement Action Partners. It's a nonprofit group of police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice professionals who speak from our experience to make communities safer by focusing law enforcement resources on the greatest threats to public safety. Over my career in law enforcement, I served as an adult probation and parole officer in Chester and Bucks counties. I specialized as a drug court officer before pursuing a PhD in public safety with a specialization in criminal justice. Overwhelmingly across the country, we're starting to see the attitudes towards the enforcement of antiquated cannabis prohibition laws change. Today, 31 states and the District of Columbia have enacted legislation reversing the decades-old and failed policy of selling people for small amounts of cannabis. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania is not one of them. In 18 of those states, adult use of cannabis is legal for those that are 21 years or older. In of those states, it is decriminalized, carrying a nominal civil fine instead of potential disastrous and life-altering burden of jail and a criminal record. Gallup suggests that the majority of Americans want to see this legalized. Here in Pennsylvania, legalization has broad support, and even among law enforcement, attitudes are changing. The 2017 Pew Research study found that among the law enforcement officers that were surveyed, 68% of the officers favored either the legalization of medical cannabis or the legalization of medical and adult use of cannabis. Although there has been some progress made throughout the state at the local level, under current state law, Pennsylvania still imposes a fine of up to $500 and/or up to 30 days of jail time for possession of up to 30 grams of cannabis. This burden falls disproportionately on the shoulders. Pardon me, my alerts are coming in for other emails. The burden falls primarily on the shoulders of Black community members who in Pennsylvania are almost 3 times as likely to be arrested for possession as white community members, despite similar rates of usage. And it disproportionately affects people that are living in poverty, for whom a fine of a couple $100s can destabilize their entire household. This lopsided enforcement has effects across the state. When communities are over-policed for low-level cannabis infractions and under-policed for more serious crimes, or those crimes aren't being solved because our officers are enforcing laws that shouldn't exist to begin with, those communities lose their trust in law enforcement. They don't call us when they need us. They don't come forward with witnesses whenever we need them. And all of us suffer because of it. Officers are only as strong as our relationships with the public. We rely on all members of our community to come forward as witnesses to or survivors of crime to assist with our investigations. We need to act sooner rather than later to decriminalize cannabis across Pennsylvania. Doing so will allow law enforcement officers to dedicate our limited resources where they're needed most for solving serious crime. And doing so will start to repair the decades of trust we've lost by enforcing these laws, allowing us to begin to build trust within the communities we serve, which is critical to keeping us all safe. Thank you so much for allowing me to provide these comments today.
Yeah, Christy, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. You know, it's always really helpful to hear from law enforcement, the law enforcement community on this issue, because, you know, there is a perception that cannabis prohibition makes us all safer, and it's often not the case. When I hear from law enforcement officials that cannabis prohibition is actually having the opposite effect, that it's making our communities less safe, making folks less trustful of law enforcement. And I'm very grateful that you were able to share that perspective. So thank you for joining us. Do want to open it up again if we have any questions from any members of the media. If not, then I will just wrap up really quickly again by letting folks know you can take a look at our comprehensive report on 50 years since the Shafer Commission, the 19 states that where possession of a joint could land you in jail. Do want to give a shout out to the report's main author, Olivia Nagel, my colleague, who spent a lot of time putting it together. Olivia, don't know if you want to say a couple words before we sign off.
I would just say thank you so much for our panelists being here today, for highlighting this important issue. You know, in this report, we really wanted to highlight the steep penalties and racial disparities in arrests that still exist for cannabis possession. Pennsylvania is one of those states, and we really wanted to give a human voice for the implications for these unjust policies. So again, I would just plug the report. I hope it can be a tool for advocates and for policymakers and for general education around the issue. So please be sure to check it out and share it widely. And thank you so much again for your time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better or wrapped up better, so we will leave it at that. Thank you all for joining us. Representative McClinton and Representative Harris, thank you so much for your time. Ms. Smith, thank you so much as well. And if you all have any questions, please contact our communications office at the Marijuana Policy Project. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.